ceremonies, representatives from the various UJ constituencies, and special guests, Mr. Joseph Wombiam, and also the speaker for today, Professor Benon Osheka from the Ugandan Technology and Management University, who serves as the Dean of the School of Business and Management at Tamil. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to welcome one and all of you to this book launch. The book that is being launched this morning is entitled Public Administration and Training in Africa, Competencies in Development Management, and this book is edited by Professors Peter Haruna from the Texas Agricultural and Mechanical International University, who is unable to join us this morning but sends his warmest wishes. And the other editor is Professor Shika Vais Prasad from the Department of Public Management and Governance, the Faculty of Management at the University of Johannesburg. The launch of this book falls at an opportune moment in the development of the University of Johannesburg, given the fact that the university has strategically aligned itself to the expansion of promoting critical Pan-Africanist thought, scholarship and research. This book, which centers on training for development, will go a long way in helping to solve the challenges that bedevil the public sector, not only in South Africa, but throughout the African continent. It was the former president, the late Nelson Mandela, who made these poignant statements, who said that a competent and a well-trained public sector are the hands and feet of public service delivery. And how true this holds for us in the sense that training and development would go a long way in resolving many of the critical service delivery challenges that we find not only in South Africa, but throughout the African continent. Furthermore, I'm also pretty sure that this book will provide a new perspective on public administration training for the development from an Afrocentric point of view. As it says, the story has to be told from a new angle. And as the African proverb very, very clearly points out, and if I could quote this African proverb, it says, until the story is told by the lion, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter, unquote. I am sure that the authors and the editors of this particular book have ventured to premise this book from the lion's point of view. On behalf of the Center of Public Management and Governance, which is housed within the Department of Public Management and Governance, within the Faculty of Management and the University of Johannesburg Library, I want to welcome one and all of you to this book launch. Thank you very much. Share the remainder of the morning with us going into the afternoon. I want to wish you all of the best, and it's going to be a fantastic opportunity to interact with one of the authors that is, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure for me to be here and an honor for you to invite me to speak on this book launch. And I consider it one of the highlights of my stay in South Africa this year. I came to South Africa to work for AECOM as Managing Director of Finance last November. I've been with the company for a couple of years now, 2.5 years. And I enjoy speaking at universities because it's a little less stressful than the work in the office. So when Shika invited me to make these few remarks, I heartily and very quickly accepted, just in case she withdraws. I would like to acknowledge the authors, some of whom may I understand are not here. Peter Haruna, Lukamba Muhia, Showman from the Republic of Congo, Public Administration, Theophilus Kulu, and Lucas on Botswana, Shika obviously on South Africa, Amoa on Ghana, and Ijoma and Okafor on Nigeria, Ricky on Zimbabwe, and the one I like most is Happy Kayuni from Malawi, and of course Benon and Tessa. I think one of them from Uganda are here. It's really an impressive publication, and I just felt that it was important for me to acknowledge all the authors. Congratulations on a job well done. I also want to make, can you hear me clearly? Yeah. I also want to identify myself with many names that I see in the book. Professor Tony Killick was my former professor of economics at the University of Nairobi in the 1970s. That tells you how young I am. Danny Kaufman was a colleague at the World Bank for many years, and I know him very well. Ladipo Adamu, also another colleague from Nigeria at the World Bank. We work together, and I know him very well. I like the book for many reasons, but most importantly, because it challenges orthodox thinking. A lot of publications that you see around the world these days, particularly in Africa, academic circles, do not go far enough to challenge orthodox thinking. And I would like to congratulate the authors for taking on a lot of the prevailing views. It could go a bit further, so I challenge you to do more in terms of not just complying with what the general thinking out there. So congratulations to the authors. There's one major contribution in the book that I want to acknowledge, and I'm sure that all of you sitting here have probably read, and that is the model of integrative and interactive training and development, which is on page 18 of the book. The three frameworks that have been articulated, I think, are path-breaking and contribute to learning. One is the academic and theoretical knowledge, which is to be contributed by academics, most of whom are presented here. It's important that you focus in that area because that is what is path-breaking. The second part of the integrative model recognizes the roles and needs of citizens as described in their life stories. That part, I think, needs a lot more work. I have not seen a lot of work that brings in the life stories of citizens, the people who experience public administration at the cutting edge, and it is for them. It's probably the more difficult part to put together, and yet they are the ones who are impacted by public administration. So I challenge you to look at that area if you have the wherewithal. And then the third part, which is the practitioners, which is what I've done all my life, is contextual and experiential knowledge. I believe that the book does a very good job of articulating the experience from the practitioner's point of view. Probably half of the book is about that. I recognize a lot of institutions that I've been associated with throughout the book. Maybe the next round could be about one third. Right now, I estimate that the book is about half about practitioners, and I recognize myself very much in that. In my view, and from the perspective of my experience in the last many years, the Bretton Woods Institution, the World Bank, and the IMF, our work in Sub-Saharan Africa and in East Asia created and laid the foundation for the rapid growth that you now witness. I was talking to colleagues in before we came about how there is the common perception that Africa and East Asia were at the same level 20, 30 years ago, a little bit longer, is only partially true. I worked in East Asia for almost half of my career at the World Bank. There was already a culture of learning. There was already a culture of serious infrastructure on the ground, which was bombed by the Americans and reinstalled. So a lot of that infrastructure in East Asia in the 1980s when I was working there was built by globally capable companies. Marubeni, Mitsubishi, behemoths that were very capable. You do not have that in Africa today. Those companies are playing some role. And I'd just like to make sure that when we have a discussion, if there's a Q&A, that we're a little bit fair on Africa. When I was going to school in the 1960s, even in Kenya, 1963, 1970, I finished high school in 1973. I think there were less than 1,000 people with high school education in Kenya. And so some of the comparisons are false. There were very few people with college degrees even in those days. So I'm not an apologist for Africa because I've worked very hard on the continent bring about development, but the continent needs to be patted on the back for a lot of what it has done. And today, in the last 15 years, Africa has the 15 or 20 fastest growing economies in the world because the foundation that was laid through structural adjustment. We can have a discussion about that, and I would love to have a discussion. If you contrast the growth in Africa with the status in South Africa, where structural adjustment was not implemented, you see growth here is 3%. Because there was a bigger base, but there was more rigidity and more resistance to reform. In most of Sub-Saharan Africa, the base was lower, but there was more room for reform, and very, very painful, very, very rough medicine was administered for many years, and it has resulted in sustained growth for very many years. I would also like to congratulate the authors for recognizing the difficulty of implementing reforms and for getting things done in public administration. Many of these things are very hard to do. You're dealing with people. You're not dealing with machines. So when you try to implement reforms, you have to take into account the fact that particularly reforms with democracy, they probably don't go hand in hand. You need a certain amount of autocracy to implement and challenge reforms. But you don't want that in Africa today. Africa is embracing democracy, and therefore democracy, as the Americans say, I'm an American, is the worst form of government except the next alternative, which is tyranny. So when you have democracy, democracy is noisy, and I love South African democracy. This is the most vibrant democracy today. You can say anything you want, and you can call the president anything you want. That is what you want. But it comes with its costs. You have kind of, meandering development. So I know from first-hand in implementing reforms in the water sector in Pakistan in the 1990s, I led the World Bank's efforts to reform the irrigation system in Pakistan. Pakistan has the world's largest irrigation system, and the Indus Basin is we are here from South Asia. And it requires a dedicated leadership, some level of discipline, and a long-term perspective. And it took about 10 years for us to reform the water sector in Pakistan with entrenched interests. And if you are interested in to learn about that, I have some publication in that area that I could refer you to, that where we put in our lessons. I was talking to a friend of mine just 3 days ago. His name is Professor Nwanze Okidegbe. He's the chief economic advisor to the president of Nigeria, Jonathan Goodluck, whose luck has run out, as you know, and he got voted out. But he's the first president in Nigeria's history to voluntarily accept defeat and embrace the winner. When I was working in Africa, Buhari was partially president at the time when I was working in Nigeria. He would never have accepted defeat. And I'm not sure that he will accept defeat when he's defeated from now. But what I'm trying to say is that democracy in Africa is on the march, is going forward. When an elected government accepts defeat and concedes, that is progress, and it will result in further development. So Nwanze Okidegbe, who is a very good friend of mine, a former colleague at the World Bank, and Ngozi, the Minister of Finance, all this, I was asking him, how is it when you're in there? He says, my friend, it's a lot tougher than you think on the outside. You can criticize and talk about it until you are in the hot soup, and you just realize that implementing reforms in a democracy is not a cakewalk. And so you come out, and he told me, look, and I asked him, would you do it again if you had the chance? He said, absolutely, I would do it again. It's a labor of love. It's really tough, but it's very satisfying. And as a former World Bank staff, this is how we felt throughout. I asked him, do you feel the same way we did? He said, absolutely. But it is hard. And that's why we feel very fortunate that we've had a career where we're able to implement reforms on the cutting edge, but we also feel very fortunate that sometimes we're able to come and interact with academics and people like you, who then, sort of humble us a little bit by clearly, articulately, and rigorously criticizing our work. And we're strong enough to take that in, and we feel that we can learn from that, and I want to congratulate you on that. The African Capacity Building Foundation is particularly close to my heart. The recent executive director, Franny Lotia, was a former colleague at the World Bank. In 2009, I was asked by the board of the World Bank to review governance at the ACBF. It had fallen prey to the usual, shall I say, compromises that happen, for lack of a better word, the usual governance issues. And so I visited Harare and worked there. We had to fire the executive secretary, and I had to write very strong medicine for the organization. And my recommendation was that the World Bank appoints its own senior staff to go and sort out the place, which we did, and imposed very, very tough leadership there. And Franny Lotia never forgave me for making that recommendation, because she was a senior staff in the bank, and I said, our reputation is on the line. But it has done a lot of good in the continent, as you all know, and the book recognizes. But I just wanted to make sure that you understand that it's not a linear development in terms of capacity building. Even the institutions which are created for capacity building fall prey to mismanagement, and that is what happened with the ACBF. In closing, I would like to congratulate the authors. I have more remarks to make, but I was up here 15 minutes, and I think I've run out of my time. I just want to thank you for inviting me, and if there's any Q&A session, I will take it. But other than that, again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm really flattered for this invitation.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I observed the protocol. I was requested by my colleague, Professor Shika, to make some remarks about the book on public administration in Africa, the competencies in the development management, a book that has 10 chapters, and when you read each of the chapters, you'll be able to understand what exactly the message is being put across. It is a book on Africa, and that is encouraging because within the scholarship of public administration, Africa has always been neglected as far as the writings are concerned. And as a continent, it is very interesting in the sense that when you read the literature from economists, they will tell you that Africa is progressing. That is one continent that withered through the global economic crisis. But when, for us public administrators, we are seeing how things are progressing, we discover that actually the continent is stagnating in a number of ways, particularly service delivery, which is at the heart of public administration. You will find there are serious questions about people-centered democracy. You will find that within Africa, the continent is almost at war with itself. There are conflicts, internal and external, tearing apart the continent. You will notice that throughout Africa, there is slow implementation of projects, and there is a growing trend of Chinization of the continent. Everywhere you go, you find the Chinese are doing almost everything, from agriculture to roads to electricity and so on, the minerals. And it is a continent that is on tension with the Western countries, especially as far as public sector reforms are concerned. You will find in most African countries, disaster and hunger is common among the printed. We have a lot of resources, but people are dying of hunger. Poverty is a common thorn. The youth unemployment is a common problem. And all of these problems point to one thing, that we have problems as far as teaching public administration is concerned. And this one will generally fall into the skills gaps. You will notice that there is a skills gaps, the competencies which the book extensively addresses, the attitudes of public administrators,
And this one you often observe it through the debates by public administrators, those who are in the practice. When you see them debating issues of public service delivery, when you see the politicians talking about issues of service delivery, then you'll be able to know that there are indeed competencies in public administration that the book is trying to address. Why, for example, would getting a visa to a fellow African country take 3 weeks? Huh? Yet when you are going to China, they will ask you, when do you want it? If you apply now, it is at 11, and you say you want it as 2, the Chinese will give you. But you cannot get it in an African country. It is extremely very, very difficult. The book, most books on public administration that we use in our universities often take a Western orientation and they neglect African perspectives. And yet, we have our own challenges that need to be voiced. And this challenge has been around within the field of public administration, because if you trace through the discipline, you will notice that during the 1940s, there was a question on whether public administration was indeed a science. And that question centered around one aspect. How could it be called a science when we are talking about the American public administration without comparison? And it emerged when the Western scholars started interacting with African democracies, with African societies, that they saw a need to adopt a comparative approach in the teaching of public administration. And even the reforms which were recommended during the 1980s up to now were all intended to make a mix of African systems, to compare them with the Western systems. And it later on emerged that some of the prescriptions which were imposed on Africa could not work. And when you read through the various books, they are trying to give an African solution to African problems. Around 2010, there was an author, those who teach and read about public administration, called Stephen Osborne. He raised 7 questions about the discipline of public administration, and one of them was what he called the fundamental question. And then it was followed by the architecture question: what exactly should be the appropriate organizational arrangements? The other question was the values question: what kind of values should we be imparting in our students, those who go through the universities as far as public administration is concerned? There was the accountability question: how should we hold people accountable, those who are in public offices? And there was the issue of ethics and so on. And when you read each of those questions and you compare it with the writings in each of these chapters, you will notice that the book is actually attempting to answer each of the questions. If you read, the book gives an introduction that opens the wounds as far as public administration in Africa is concerned, then ventures into specific country problems, Botswana, Congo, Uganda, Nigeria, and so on. And then it ties up. The last chapter is giving an assessment. And it is a nice reading, those of you who wish to read about public administration. And once it is applicable actually in almost all disciplines, because it touches on human resource, it touches on public service, it touches on issues of governance, it touches on issues of public sector management, it touches on real public administration, the administrative theories, and so on. And the authors, Professor Shika, who is with us, and her colleague, who is not around, are experts in their own right. I will not give an introduction to Professor Shika, but what I know, if you read through her CV, you will notice that she's a true academician who has been able to rise through the ranks within the shortest possible time. She does not spend 3 years on one rank. If you read through the CV, that is one message that you will observe. From 2007 to 2010, from 2010 to 2014, and now She's from January 2015, she's a full professor in the field of public administration, a well-deserved recognition. And I was asking myself, where did we first meet? In my mind, but I have not yet answered that question. But it could have been in one of the conferences in Asia. That is the International Association of Schools and Institutes of Public Administration. That is an association that brings together scholars teaching public administration, and that is possibly where we could have met. Professor Shika and Professor Christel and my colleague from Dominique, who is from Rwanda, our neighbor, in March visited our university in Uganda on some collaboration. And unfortunately, they did not meet the Vice Chancellor, whom I would wish to introduce, Professor Venantius Mariamuleba. If you don't mind, you can stand up for... And they were able to meet myself and my other colleagues and the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Jude Lubega, who is also here with us. And the two professors of computer science. If you are talking about the grandparents of computer science in Uganda, those are the ones. I don't know whether they are grandmothers, but these are grandfathers of the discipline in the country and in Africa. And we discussed a lot during their visit, and that's when it was agreed that we have to make a return visit. And we are supposed to work as the two universities, particularly in the fields of public administration and governance, on exchange between the students and the staff. We can work on joint supervision of students as far as PhD and Masters is concerned. Our memorandum of understanding will see us doing joint publications and then doing some joint research, and all that is aimed at fulfilling the objectives of this book. Because public administration training, if you want to build competence in development management, you do not do it only through a classroom, but there are other avenues that can be used. We are grateful for the invitation. I end my remarks there. Thank you very much.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. The book Public Administration in Africa, Competences in Development Management was born from our interest in public administration as both a discipline and a professional field of practice. Focused research and scholarship on public education and training in Africa seemed to be lacking. The book therefore tries to find answers to several questions, such as how do African nations approach public administration education and training? What are the perspectives of public administration training in African nations? What competences do public managers need to be successful? And what lessons have we learned in providing administrative training? The book is an integrated synthesis of studies from Botswana, Congo, Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, South Africa, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. The aim is to provide guidance to faculty and students striving for updated and detailed understanding of public administration training and development in Africa. This project was a 1.5 years of committed journey, and I'm thankful to my first co-editor, Professor Peter Haruna, Texas Agriculture and Mechanical International University in America, for making this journey an academic benchmark. Peter and I share a common understanding across the continents, and we have developed this understanding through comparative and through collaborative unison with the publisher Taylor and Francis. We have signed another book agreement that will deal with the issues of public budgeting in Africa. So there will be another book launch next year. I am indeed grateful to Ms. Laura Zobel, editor Taylor and Francis, for her continuous support and guidance, and above all, believing in me. Nonetheless, this book is not my individual achievement. The credit equally goes to all my authors who worked with me hand in hand through their commitment and meeting with timelines. The authors of my books are academics in various African universities, and I haven't met them all in person, and we haven't communicated with each other as yet, and yet we are a team. We share a synchronized way of thinking and coherence in writing. Actually, we share a collective intellectual consciousness across the African borders. With so much of support from my team and people around me, I am bound to say that I am blessed. I am truly blessed. But beyond everything, a very big thank you to the biggest and the strongest support in my life, my husband Anish. So thank you all and God bless.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.